Just to remind yourselves as far as the on-course page, you go to Wednesday discussions, click on that, and you'll find the video recording for today and way back when. So I'll add that sometime probably tomorrow. So that's good also because this is going to be mostly a review session. So if you missed something, or if you're one of the two that aren't here, you can go back and you can catch up and get everything down that was covered in the review. And then the Exam 1 review guide, which will be the focus of today's discussion. If you want to talk country profiles at the end, if you want to talk individually about something at the end, cool, that's completely fine. But the focus of this discussion will be answering these questions and making sure you're prepared as possible. So I'll come back with more of an exam review, discussion, protocol, what it will look like here in a minute. But go ahead and, yeah, was that, oh, sorry. And so I'll go ahead and just kind of some data I analyzed and, from the stuff that you guys have been producing. And so what, the first question of the semester in the textbook, it asked you, what is geography? And 86% knew that it wasn't the study of rocks and it's not the memorization of countries, capitals, and whatnot. And that's higher than previous semesters, so I don't know what's going on. I don't know what explains that, but maybe you're coming prepared with a better understanding of what geography is. It's not the study of rocks. But anyway, so the second 3-point activity that I asked was the simple question, just asking you to describe Indianapolis. So in your own words, you could, just tell me about Indianapolis. Tell me, how you would describe it. It could be, one word. It could have been, like some of you, 3 paragraphs. So what I did was I just took all of the words, I went through and I copied and pasted every single response from the 80 different students in all the various courses that use this textbook. And after removing some keywords, Indianapolis, Indiana, describe, what I did was I took those words and threw it into what is called a Wordle word cloud. Wordle is a website in which you can just take a bunch of words, throw it in there, and what it'll do is it'll create this graphic that have all these different words, and what it is the most frequently used words. So essentially the words that are the most frequently used are the biggest, the ones, they're mentioned, but not as much or smaller. So it's a nice, simple way to kind of get a snapshot of what 80 different people thought in all kinds of different ways to describe Indianapolis. And so what this is of course, because it's a discussion, let's see if we can analyze some themes, some trends that we notice from this word cloud. So just take a couple minutes, or just a minute, some themes, some things that kind of jump out and stand out. So in other words, if this was handed to you, or handed to someone not from Indianapolis, and said, this is how people have described Indianapolis, what would be some things they would point out? And also keep in mind, okay, what would make this different than Chicago, New York City, Avon? So what are some themes, some things you note from this data that you guys created?
It's large. Large.
So large, so you see a lot of size descriptions. Which is kind of the thing about Indianapolis. It's, if in the case of the rest of Indiana, yeah, it's large. In the case of the United States, yeah, it's medium. And so you see like medium size. Then the other times you see small. So you see small up there as well. And so it's, definitely, it all depends on, how the person is describing it, probably where they're from. But we're a fairly large city, obviously, especially here in the state of Indiana, where we overwhelmingly are the largest city. Okay, so there's some size things that were definitely obvious. And they're it could be anywhere.
Location, central, and in the middle.
Location. And so you see central, center, a couple different times. Right here, boom, boom. And so that speaks to a couple different things. First off, Indianapolis, the center of the state. But also, Indianapolis, the center of the country, the crossroads of America. We're very much in the heartland. We're in the middle of the country, here in the Midwest. And so we look at location, you can kind of see that played itself out. Whereas, in, let's say, New York City, I don't know if you'd see center and central. Well, that's maybe Central Park, perhaps. Miami, not so much center. It's not in the center of the country, not in the center of the state. And so we can already kind of see and understand some differences. Other themes or trends. Diverse. And so if we go back 15 years ago, if I would have collected this data for students 15 years ago who were IUPUI students who live in Indianapolis, I don't think you would see diverse mentioned too often. You wouldn't see different. I think different. You wouldn't see that mentioned too often. Growing, wouldn't mention that. So you can also see some changes that are happening here in Indianapolis reflected here. And we can just kind of just imagine what people 15 years ago would have said. No, they wouldn't have said growing. They would have said diverse. Indianapolis was nothing of the sort 15 years ago. Popular. I mean, who popular? Indianapolis? What's going on? But obviously things are changing. The city is becoming more attractive, especially to student-age individuals. Other themes.
Businesses, sports.
So what are we known for? If this was Nashville, Tennessee, would they have sporting events? No, music would be honky tonks. Country music would be the big words you'd see. In the case of Indianapolis, sports is our business. Sporting events, whether it be Final Four, or it be even the gymnastics, swimming, of course the Colts games, the Super Bowl, that's what we do. Sporting events. That's kind of our competitive advantage. And so that describes us. Indianapolis definitely is the role of sports tourism. Anything else? This is great.
I have a question.
Yes.
Why is Chicago a big word on there?
And so that's another thing. So you see, what other geographic areas are mentioned? So you have two states, Ohio and Illinois, so the neighboring states. But of course, Chicago is the only other geographic location really mentioned here. And that's because most people, as far as explaining where Indianapolis is, they refer to it as it's near Chicago. And so what that also showcases the fact that Chicago, in the case of Indianapolis, Chicago is the nearest big city. So New York City is the most powerful city in the country, no doubt about that. But as far as for Indianapolis, for us, we are much more connected to Chicago than we are to New York City or LA, the two other bigger cities. So it definitely also speaks to location as well. But I'll also come back to that. We're kind of, a lot like Milwaukee, St. Louis, Detroit, Minneapolis. We're kind of these other kind of big cities, all kind of surrounding the big city of Chicago. And I'll come back later in the semester when I talk about urban geography and tie that one together. Other things.
Government's on there, I see Capitol.
Capital, and so that's kind of also, not only are we sports, but we're the government, sports and government headquarters. Capital with an A means it's Indianapolis is the capital of the state of Indiana. Capital with an O is that actual building, the State House, the Capitol building with an O. This differentiates those two often confused words. Cool, this is great. So this is just kind of a way we can kind of take the stuff a little bit farther, and you rocked it, so I don't even have to go through my interpretations. So here was another one where I had so many, this wide variety of responses, and just to quickly help explain how you find the answer to this question. Using the scale in the bottom right-hand corner, what is the straight line distance from Lucas Oil Stadium to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway? So it's very simple to do this. And I got 70 feet, and I got 550 miles. Has two different responses. So essentially what you do is you just go down here. You take this bar is 1 mile. So I'm going to take this bar, I'm just going to kind of stack it, and we'll see how many we got. So it's this very simple way to find out the straight line distance from these two locations. So there's 1 mile, 2 mile, 3 mile, 4 mile, and there's 5 miles. So it's about halfway, 4.5 miles. So that was the answer to that particular free-point activity. I normally wouldn't mention this one, but the wide range of answers, thought why not use this as a learning opportunity. So it's just a simple way to use the scale to find distance. Another one I got here, I'm just more going to talk about this because just following directions as precisely as possible. No, I did not count off if you went over 3 sentences. I did count off, or I didn't count if you just wrote Egypt, or Egypt's crowded. So I still, to compare and contrast, you had to add a little bit more. And so when you compare the arithmetic density and the physiological density of these two countries, and you see a particular pattern, and that's the situation is, yeah, I mean, Egypt is crowded, but when we look at its physiological density, the amount of arable land, the amount of actual area in which people can live, tiny, minuscule. So it's extremely overcrowded because it's just this little sliver which everyone is pretty much forced to live because you can't live in the middle of the desert. So Egypt, definitely more overcrowded than the United States. And so explaining it, using the data, and so that just more is a chance to explain, follow the directions as precisely as possible more than anything. Finally, the most recent free-point activity, a different pattern than previous semesters. So the question was, what do you call a soft drink when you go to the restaurant? So 45% the blue, most people said soda. Second place was Coke. Third place pop. And fourth, don't drink soft drinks. And that's a higher percentage than last semester. So I don't know, maybe the First Lady's health and fitness thing is working. So people aren't drinking soft drinks anymore. I don't know. And soda pop, that's definitely not. I actually should look at the data and see where those people are from, but that's definitely not a Midwestern thing. So what's different is Coke had a higher percentage last semester. Coke was like 30-some%. Soda was also in the 30s. So it was much more of an even split. So I don't know what's going on. I don't know if it was this weird deal in which most people just chose soda because it was the first option, so they just want to get it over with or what. But this does kind of make sense. You can see how red, blue, and green, we're kind of a mix. We don't really have one dominate. And of course, somebody mapped this out, excuse me. And so they mapped this out. So what they did was they did a whole mass amount of data. So areas that are red are where they say Coke more. Areas that are green are where they say pop more. Areas that are blue say soda more. So you can see the American South overwhelmingly use and say Coke. And that makes sense. Coke is from the American South with its headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. But if you look at Indianapolis and central Indiana, we kind of stick out, kind of this little circle. And we are kind of a blend. I mean, we're almost purple or brown because we're kind of a mixture of all those different colors. And so we are nice right there in the middle. And the data that you guys produced and created, without me doing too much steering, produced pretty much the same results. So this kind of taking the data and going further with it is the goal of that little 10 minutes of our time. All right, so let me go ahead and do the exam 1 review. And we'll finish that off probably, I'd say 50 minutes is what the first class was. But we can go as long as you want. So just keep asking questions. All right, so here's the procedure. Is that big enough? Let me see, everyone see that? All right. So here's what will happen. So on Monday at 3 p.m. in this room, what will happen is you'll be given 5 pieces of paper that will be stapled together. So it'll be an 8.5 by 11. And I'll randomly from this list pick 5. So essentially you already know the questions. And I will try to get a nice random sampling. I'm definitely not going to have them all from 1 or 2. It'll be nice spread out as far as pattern. So what will happen is you'll see one of those particular descriptions or questions, let's say, at the top. And then you'll have the entire page to do as much explaining as you want. You'll even have the back side of the page as well. So give me as much as you want, as much as you can, I should say. So as we talk about these individually, some of it, I will want you kind of talking my language. But for some of them, you can add your own insights. You can add your own examples. Don't feel like you just have to use the examples I use. Whatever showcases that you understand a concept or can explain one of these questions is all that matters. And so you just kind of can go at it. You'll have as much time as possible. It says 1 hour and 15. We can go outside if you need more time. So that's the exam 1. Questions about it? So let's go ahead and start hacking at some of these questions. Anything you want me to explain? Yeah.
Can you go over the types of spatial diffusion?
Yes, types of spatial diffusion. So these are going to come back in Chapter 7 in the health geography chapter. So that's kind of why we introduced it earlier. I introduced it earlier. All right, so we've got the different types. Contagious. Hierarchical. I apologize for the handwriting, but the relocation and network. Okay, so each one being able to explain each one. And I will say this, let me just clarify. So yeah, video, there's a video 1.6. So in section 1.6 there's a video, and I specifically talk about the types of diffusion. So that's where I go in, I give a little bit more description than the text. And I also provide examples. So section 1.6 video is crucial for this question. All right, so contagious diffusion. Essentially, as far as how to describe contagious diffusion, you have that core area where an idea comes from. And that core area then spreads outward in all different directions. And so with contagious, kind of think of it as core that then spreads outward. So an analogy, a big, huge fountain, drop a coin in the fountain, you can watch that ripple, that wave go outward all directions from where it actually hit the surface. So that's a way, kind of a visualization of it. Contagious diffusion spreads outward. Another characteristic of contagious diffusion is of all of them, this is the one when we think about direct person-to-person contact. So an idea spreads contagiously. A disease spreads contagiously. So from word of mouth. So contagious, we could say, for example, flu is spread from person to person. So that could be an example of a contagious diffusion. Walmart, the growth of Walmart is an example of contagious diffusion. I say that because if you look at a map, a dot map of Walmart over time started in Arkansas, in that particular area of the country. Then it spread out farther. It spread out throughout much of the Midwest and Southeast. Then it spread out through the West Coast, the Northeast. Then it went to Canada. Then it went to Mexico. And so it spread outward from its cultural core, its origins there in the middle of nowhere, Arkansas. And so contagious diffusion is something that spreads outward from a source area in not all directions, but just outward. So we'll come back, like I said, in health geography, especially with flu, come back and explain how that diffusion matters to understand it and all that. So that's the first one, contagious diffusion. There's definitely more examples in this video for that one. Hierarchical diffusion. As the name implies, hierarchical. So large to medium-sized cities to small. So popular culture overwhelmingly follows this model, a hierarchical model as far as the spread of ideas. So hierarchical trends, fashion trends don't come from Edinburgh, even though they have a great outlet mall. Fashion trends come from Chicago, LA, Paris, big cities. And then eventually over time they work themselves to medium-sized cities. And then eventually that might work its way to smaller cities, suburbs, what have you. So diffusion of ideas that go through big core areas, big large cities, big large areas, big prominent areas, and then works its way to other areas. Another example, we could almost use this as an opportunity, hierarchical, to add reverse hierarchical. So kind of it takes it the opposite. So hierarchical diffusion argues that things in popular culture goes from big cities to medium to small. Reverse is the opposite. Small cities to medium-sized cities to big cities. And once again, we can go back to our good friend Walmart. Walmart is a good example also of reverse hierarchical because it started pretty much in rural areas. It's pretty much the only place you found Walmarts is in rural areas. Then over time, they expanded their strategy. They started moving to bigger areas, bigger towns, because people wanted cheap goods. And now they're in urban areas all throughout the country. So Walmart's also an example of reverse hierarchical diffusion, in which it's something rural that's increasingly becoming found in more urban areas. But more often than not, you're going to find stuff, hierarchical diffusion, more often than reverse hierarchical. What else was I wanting to say with that? I forget.
What about political movements? Would that be reversed?
Political movements. Where did that come from? Was it, yeah, political movements. And so, we could go a couple different directions with that. But anytime you see the words grassroots, I mean, that almost just has the kind of implication of it being something rural. But we can also think of it as something that starts off in a small area, grassroots movement. You know, they could say the Bernie Sanders thing, kind of starting in college towns, in certain areas. It's a grassroots movement that's now becoming more popular, I guess, according to the polls last week. I'm sure things have already changed since then. But yeah, political movements can be both. They can be both, for sure. That's something we'll talk a lot about later in the semester, no doubt about it. Next up, relocation. So where the other ones have been kind of more focused on the movement of ideas, the growth of Walmarts, expansion of business to new areas, whether it be rural or urban, this one's a little bit more focused on the people. So the relocation, we're going to really focus with this is migration. Migration of actual humans. I think that's redundant, but migration of people. So what happens is people, when they move and they migrate, they bring with them their culture. They bring with them the things they like. They bring with them the things they're interested in. So relocation diffusion. Several different examples of these. So more recently, we've got the relocation diffusion of Latino migrants to the near west side. We also have the relocation diffusion and migration of Burmese or Myanmar people down in Southport on the south side of south side of Indianapolis. And so when those people move and migrate, they bring with them their culture. And so guess what's popping up in Southport, Indiana? A bunch of Asian groceries. Why? Because people, as people move here, they bring with them the stuff they like in case of the Burmese Asian cuisine. You go over here to the near west side, George Washington High School, there on Washington Street. See all types of Spanish signs, Spanish named restaurants, stuff that's geared towards the population there that's relocated and brought with them their cultural tastes and characteristics. Another example is the movement of the African American music scene. So the African American music scene. And so as African Americans have migrated, especially in large numbers en masse, subsequently the diffusion of the core areas of African American music have also moved. So African American music has also an example of relocation diffusion. So just kind of the quick 411, after the Civil War, for a variety of reasons, African Americans got the hell out of the South. They migrated to the North. And when they migrated to the North, they migrated to St. Louis, Chicago, Detroit, Indianapolis. And with that, brought with them their music. And so the music scene, the core area, switched from New Orleans and Memphis to Chicago, St. Louis, Indianapolis, Detroit, Motown. And so subsequently, the African music tradition and music also relocated with the movement of people. Next up, network diffusion. So network diffusion, just think of it as two things: transportation and social networks. Your friends, your family. And I guess your Facebook friends too. But, so network diffusion, so that's the movement of ideas, products, goods, via specific. We've got to add that word, specific. Specific. Transportation networks or social networks. So for example, I think in the text I used the example, for some reason someone said, all I do is talk about drugs and porn stars. Trust me, I guess in my book I do, but in real life I don't. But anyway, so the movement of methamphetamine in the United States from the southern border where its origins, or a lot of the origins is. It is moved via highways, transportation. So if you look at the movement and where you find a lot of the bus are along these transportation networks. And so the drugs are diffusing or spreading from their source area to their destination via highways, via those networks. Another example, let's go back to the 1980s. Let's talk about porn stars in the 1980s. One of the things is they all were heavily affected by sexually transmitted diseases. For example, AIDS. Just devastated as far as that population. Of course, they've learned since then, and they've definitely, there's better precautions in that particular industry. I'm not going to go there, though. So what's happened over time is that particular network of porn stars, all of them who are friends with each other, who interact with each other, they had much higher rates of AIDS, whereas people who aren't in those social networks would be much less likely to be inflicted with AIDS, HIV, sexually transmitted disease, because they're not part of those networks and those interactions. Those are just two examples of transportation, but also social networks. So you look at a lot of politics. One of the problems with politics today is people pretty much listen and only talk to people in their own network. And so Republicans over here talking to Republicans and sharing things on Facebook and Twitter, and they're all liking it and whatever. And the Democrats are all talking to each other, they're liking it. They have definitely a separate social network that over time we're seeing in the United States, but that's a whole different thing. Did I answer your question?
I think so. I think the hardest one, like the network and the contagious, I wasn't sure how. So the network you have to be, it's more like through an avenue of people or physical transportation rather than it affects everybody.
Exactly. And so it's the diffusion, the spread of ideas, goods, whatever, via networks of transportation, of roads, or networks of friends, acquaintances, what have you.
Okay.
So another example, we've got, let's say, we've got the black line in the subway system in New York, and we have the green line. So someone gets on the green line here, they get on the green line, start sneezing, start spreading, spreading some influenza or whatever all over. And so then the people, then it has migrates, and so people that are connected to that particular network are then going to be exposed to it, where people here on the black line never exposed to it. So they would be not part of that particular network. So this is all going to mostly come back from the health geography. That's why a lot of the examples I use are health related. But this is the basic ideas. That's the main thing. We'll come back and flesh those out later more. Cool. All right. Next. Go ahead and fire away. Whoever. Or we can finish. A weekend begins whenever we finish, so. Never mind. Go ahead.
Just for clarification, the British Agricultural Revolution, that's when industrialization took over and more people moved to the cities because there wasn't as much need for agricultural work?
Yep. So I'll just go just real quickly far. The first agricultural revolution, and then the second, or the British agricultural revolution. So if you go back to the text, these are actually kind of separate. As I kind of go through the history of human civilization as quickly as I can, but these happen kind of separate from each other. The first one, thousands of years, slow transition, very spread out. We have the independent inventions. So coming up with agriculture without the help of anybody else, and so that was all happening all throughout the world at different times, different spots. But the moral of the story is the first agricultural revolution is the first time humans start to settle in one spot. So no longer are they hunters and gatherers. So they go from transition to hunters and gatherers to actually domesticating, or what's this called, ag. Just doing ag. And so revolution, a change. So keep in mind, what are the changes? So when you answer this question, if it's asked, make sure you explain what were the changes. The changes going from hunters and gatherers to actually domesticating agriculture. So other things, this is the origins of cities, because now you have people settling with each other. You've got the origins of a lot of diseases, as people interact with each other now on much higher rates, but also interact with animals. Now that we're domesticating them, we're putting them in pens, and all of that. So we also have the origin of war, as different settlements have things they like, and other ones have things they're short of, and so they say, well, we want that, so we go there, we'll just take it out. We'll just fight them, we'll just wipe them out, we'll get those resources that way. So the origins of war, we can go on and on and on. Origins of prostitution, that's another thing.
Economics in general?
The origins of the origins of money and trade, i.e. economics. So as you start developing surpluses of stuff, oh, let's sell that surplus to there. Well, they have deficient. They need it, so let's sell it. And so all of that. So you get trade going with settlement, economics, money. So the economic system begins. But population, does it grow? Yes, population does grow, but nothing even close like the British Agricultural Revolution. And so yes, you did see some population growth, but overwhelmingly, an outcome of the British Agricultural Revolution, huge growth in population. So when we look at the 20th century, the most dynamic century there will ever be in the history of human beings. We went from 1.6 billion people to 6.1 billion. How do we do that? Huge population growth due to advancements in agriculture. And those advancements are mostly science and tech. So, things like just better seeds, better techniques, better awareness, better understanding of crossbreeding and all of that stuff. Also crop rotation, so understanding, okay, if we rotate these crops, we can actually get more use out of our land. In Greensburg, I'm sure you know all about crop rotation. Same with Hancock County. So essentially what you do is one year you plant soybeans, which add nutrients to the soil, and then the next summer you plant corn, which takes nutrients out of the soil. So you kind of rotate it, so that you're just not just wiping the soil and kind of creating a situation where it has no more nutrients. You can't do anything with it. So, but the big one also, mechanization. So that essentially, that's huge, mechanization of agricultural labor. So it used to be done by humans, it's now being done by machines. And so all this resulted in not only a huge population growth, because no longer do people need to have, be working in the agricultural areas because machines replaced them, massive rural to urban migration. So I would say those are the two biggest things out of the British Agricultural Revolution in terms of impacts: huge rural to urban migration and huge population growth. Those are the main ideas there. So for all of these, just kind of use this as an example. The notes are useful, but make sure you write out your responses in full sentences and essay and all of that. So notes are good for maybe organizing your thoughts, but write it all out and explain yourself in full sentences. Because I don't know what that means. Disease, what does that mean? So that's something that I want you to explain more. Cool. Where are we going next?
I have a question about the regions, the differences between formal, functional, and
cool. Cool. All right, so we've got formal, functional, and vernacular, also known as perception or perceptual. So we got formal. And so for these, being able to define, tell me what they are, but then also give me some examples would be useful. Functional and vernacular, and I didn't make up these terms. All right, formal, functional, and region. So different ways we can say the word region, or define a region. Formal, common characteristic. So with a formal region, there's a common characteristic, characteristic, and put parentheses S, because it can be one or more. It can be a few characteristics. So, of course, a formal region, the example would be the Corn Belt. Corn Belt is this area of the country in which overwhelmingly, that's where what they do agriculturally is corn. Down in the southern part of the country, they got the Cotton Belt, where overwhelmingly they grow cotton. So the agriculture is usually nice and easy as far as examples of formal regions. The Dairy Belt, which is like Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, Indiana. The Pig Belt, right here. We're right here where we eat a lot of pork. So those are examples of formal regions, which the common thing they have in common is they grow a lot of corn. Other examples of formal regions. I'll offer it to you. Give me some other examples of some formal regions, which they have one or a few things in common that makes it a region.
could New York City be like, I mean, like they're really known for fashion and everything, and also like with like the Wall Street and finance.
Okay. So we could let's go ahead. We'll call a formal region. It's called the Boss Wash Megalopolis. It's a big word. I realize that, but essentially from Boston, Massachusetts, to New York City, to Philadelphia, to Baltimore, to DC, it's just one massive urban area, in which it's a very densely packed area. Very, very high properties as far as price of homes, very expensive to live there. And so this common characteristic, we could say, of this region, the Boss Wash region, is the fact it's heavily urban, huge amount of power, a lot of financial stuff going on, whereas just on the other side of this particular area, you get the Appalachian Mountains. Completely opposite region in which low income, poverty, rurality are the characteristics of that particular, we can say, Appalachia characteristics of that former region. Lower income, rural, white, heavily white, diverse, economically powerful. So those are different ways to also explain that. Other examples?
Well, like where there's a lot of oil fields, like Texas, Oklahoma.
So we've got, I'm sure there's an oil belt. I'm sure there's a name for it. We love our belts. I'm sure it's the oil belt. Rust Belt. Rust Belt's another formal region. Rust Belt. What's the common characteristic of the Rust Belt, other than them having rust?
This is the first I've ever heard of it, actually.
Rust Belt is Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Cleveland, Toledo, maybe Detroit. These are all areas.
Used to be like really high in the I can't think of the word.
Manufacturing.
Yeah, manufacturing.
Used to manufacture, now they no longer. So they have factories, they're now abandoned, thus the Rust Belt. They're rusting. And so that's the common thing that would say unite. I don't know if that's the best word. Unites that particular area, which makes it different than what's called the Sun Belt, which is most of the southern part of the country that's seeing a growth in manufacturing. Cool. And I believe I'm sure there's probably videos on that one. All right, functional. Key to functional is you have a core area that serves a surrounding periphery. So you have a core area that surrounds, you got a periphery or an outer region that is served by the core. And the best way to showcase this is metropolitan areas, metros. I mean, so you think about metropolitan Indianapolis, the core, Indianapolis. Then you've got all the surrounding, Carmel, Avon, Plainfield, Greenwood, Greenfield, Greensburg. All of that is probably, you could say, part of the metropolitan region. And so the functional region, we think about these also TV markets. We can also think about these in terms of NFL fan regions. You look at Colts fans, where they're coming, the people that go to Lucas Oil. Overwhelmingly, most of the people are coming from somewhere near Indianapolis. Yeah, you'll get some people coming from Lafayette, Muncie, Columbus, maybe even Evansville. So the Colts fan region, definitely you could say is this particular area, but its core is central Indiana and around Indianapolis. But you go up to Chicago, it's not a part of that functional region. Bears fans, there are no Bears fans up there. Greensburg, let's use Greensburg. Greensburg kind of has overlapping functional regions. Greensburg's way down here. Here's Indianapolis, down here Cincinnati. And so Greensburg's kind of in two functional regions. Do you get any Cincinnati news channels?
Yeah.
So you get Cincinnati TV?
Yeah, we got like Fox Cincinnati, like Reds games and stuff.
So you get Fox, so you get Reds games, whereas here we get Reds games on Fox Sports Indiana, but we get a whole lot more Blues games. I hate anything that has to do with St. Louis. But anyway, so this here is an example of a functional region. People, commute every day for jobs in Cincinnati. I'm sure you know people that commute from Cincinnati to Greensburg every day, and then also Indianapolis to Greensburg. So functional region key is a core that serves a surrounding area and creates a region. One of the problems with functional region is hard to kind of draw a boundary You know, where does it end? Where does it begin? It's kind of hard. You can already see there's overlap with the Greensburg example. Whereas with the formal regions, it's usually a little bit easier to draw boundaries. Finally, the last one, vernacular perception. So this, you know, if I had more time, I would take a poll and ask everyone, name all the states in the Midwest. They would vary from person to person. It's all your perception of what the Midwest is. Some would include Kentucky. Some would never include Kentucky. No way Kentucky's part of the Midwest. But in baseball, Little League Baseball, it's part of the Great Lakes region. So, you know, vernacular is this perception. It also relates to kind of, if I gave you a map of Europe, and you kind of, you said, okay, over here are red-haired people, over here are people with bad teeth, over here are snooty people with smelly armpits, over here are people that eat a lot of pasta. You know, your perception of a place, your view of a particular area. So this is a little bit harder to find, a little bit more touchy-feely. But another example is down there in Greenwood, Indiana. I grew up, and we went to an area we call Podunk. Now, nobody knows what it is. It's not on the map. Podunk's not on the map. But it's this area just south of Center Grove, kind of remote, kind of rugged. You kind of get lost. You have no idea where you are. But it's extremely remote. And for our friends, that area, Podunk, yeah, we're going to go down to Podunk, is our perception. So it's, you know, and so you have your own in your own world. So think about, you know, safe areas you might feel safe. That's your perception of an area. If you're a school of science, you have a much better perception of that whole area of campus compared if you're a school of nursing. You probably know more about this side of campus. And so perception is all in your mind. So what is the Midwest? What is the South? Depends on who you're talking to. Cool. I don't know who asked that question, but that's that one. Any more?
The 4 stages of the demographic transition
Okay,
model.
so this is one that's discussed this week. So a lot of you probably haven't, I have no idea, I have not looked at who's participating in Chapter 5 stuff yet, but it's a lot to cover, so we'll try to hit the basics. So the DTM, she asked the question about the 4 stages of the demographic transition model. So what this is, as the name implies, a model is a rough way to say, about most of the countries of the world, most of the regions of the world, about 90% of them follow this particular transition. But of course, there's exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, different areas of the world, they transition over time in these 4 different stages. So we got stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4. And I'll go ahead and just kind of say that in stage 2, countries that enter stage 2, we call them developing. So you're going to start to hear me say a lot more this semester, developing and developed countries. Developing, typically lower income, have less things that make them attractive. People aren't moving there. Whereas in stage 4, we have what we call developed countries. United States, developed country. United Kingdom, Great Britain, France, Germany, developed countries. Japan, developed country. Haiti, developing country. I'm not going to give away too many of them because the country profile asked us. So if I say your country, I don't want to give away a free answer. Mexico, kind of in the middle. Mexico, Brazil. Yeah, it's, we'll say Russia, I guess. We'll say Russia's kind of somewhere in the middle. And so what it is, like I said, over time, countries transition through these 4 stages. So what are the 4 stages? And so the key to this is 2 things. The birth rate, apropos, birth rate being green, death rate being red. Didn't mean to do that, but all right. So we'll track the birth rate and death rates. So here's low, here's high. Okay, so stage 1 countries. Stage 1 countries, high birth rate. Oh, come on, green. High birth rate. But also high death rate. So a whole lot of people being born, a whole lot of people dying. What's that going to do for population growth? Hardly anything.
Stagnant.
So in terms of population growth, stagnant is a good word. low, minimal, hardly anything. That makes sense. A lot of people being born, a lot of people dying. Throughout most of human history, human beings on Earth, so we go back through that first agricultural revolution, so for 15,000 years, the whole world was stage 1. Today, there's maybe just a couple areas within certain countries where you might see that, but let's just say this, there are no countries today that are stage 1. So no countries are stage 1 today. Why? We've transitioned across the world, doesn't matter where you are, countries have transitioned over time. Of course at different rates and at different times, but everybody's transitioned through stage 1. So there are no countries today that are stage 1. When we get to stage 2 countries, what happens is death rates start to fall. Why do death rates start to fall? Medical advancements. So better medical technology, better medical awareness, do's and don'ts. Better understanding of stuff that will get you sick and stuff that won't get you sick. Better diets. The global economy, the improvements in transportation. It's easier to get your fruits and veggies and all your various food groups that we learned all about. And so essentially people live longer. So death rates start to fall. And you'll see this in developing countries in their data. You'll see a sudden decline in death rates. But birth rates still remain high. There's kind of what we call lag. A lot of this is related to cultural norms. If your mom had 10 kids and your grandma had 10 kids, you're probably going to have 10 kids. Even though more of the kids are surviving those early years, even though more people are living longer, you're still having a large number of kids. And so in stage 2 countries, very, very, very high birth rate, declining death rate. What's that going to do to population growth?
Increase.
Huge increase. And so developing countries, the fastest growing countries in the world, countries that are increasing their population naturally because of births, that's because of not throwing in migration growth. Those are stage 2 countries. And so developing countries, lower income countries, more often than not, are also fast growing countries. And they're growing because the medical advancements, medical awareness has diffused to their countries, but at the same time birth rates still remain high, and that eventually comes down here in stage 3. And so what happens is death rates start to level off, but the big thing with stage 3 is the dramatic decline in birth rates. Now what's causing birth rates to decline? Let's just say 2 main things are causing birth rates to decline in stage 3 countries. 2 main things cause birth rate decline. First one,
Urbanization.
thank you. Massive rural to urban migration. So a characteristic of stage 3 countries, rural to urban migration. And so what that means is the view of children in rural areas, I know this sounds bad, but in rural areas that are heavily agriculture, children are seen as assets. It's more hands out in the field. It's more laborers. It's more people that can be employed. More people that can make money for the family. Whereas in urban areas, where people aren't doing agriculture, now they become an economic burden. And so children, kind of our view of children going from economic assets to economic burdens, also parallels this rural to urban migration. Which, if we can go back to the British Agricultural Revolution, we kind of explain what caused that rural to urban migration. As far as the mechanization of agricultural labor, which no longer they need huge numbers of people to work out in the fields. And so thus the birth rate goes down. So that's one reason. More recently, I would argue the most important, gender equality. Gender equality. Women being viewed as actually, people participating in the economy, people actually going to college, starting careers, not as baby makers, not as just cranking out babies that can go out and work in the fields. And so gender equality is something that as gender equality increases, improves throughout the world, that also adds to this transition. This is why we can predict countries are going to continue to transition, especially the diffusion of ideas. The diffusion of, women have a say in their reproduction. Not being forced to do whatever they're told to do. Finally, we get to stage 4 countries, and that's where death rates low. Wherever my green went, birth rates, I throw it, guess not. And then birth rates are low. And so what does that mean for population growth? It's very low. So let me step back. So in stage 3, you still get growing population, but it's nothing like the growth in stage 2. So you still see growth, but then in stage 4 countries, population growth starts to go level out. And in some places in Europe, it's actually starting to decline. Populations are declining. That's why migration is something in some cases they're actually wanting. In some cases, this refugee migration sounds bad. It's timely because it's filling the labor shortage. That's a whole other deal. So that's the demographic transition model. So what the argument is, countries over time transition through this, and so each, whatever country in the world, you can categorize it as being, of course, not stage 1, either stage 2, stage 3, or stage 4.
One of my other classes, we were talking about this, and there was like a hypothetical like 5th stage.
Yeah, I'm not ready yet for that.
Not ready.
I'm not ready. It's pretty much there. I would believe it, but I'm not ready yet. We'll give it a few more years. But yeah, stage 5, and then stage 5, I believe, is negative growth. I think it actually takes. We're actually now heading down negative. But I guess that's still to be determined.
This question, I haven't gotten into the chapter yet, so maybe this is irrelevant, but you don't hear the term much anymore, but third world countries, is that in stage 1 or stage 2? Or
Nope. That goes, okay. So in the future, I'm going to talk about the global economy. So you've got the core countries of the world that dominate, have decisions. Then you've got the semi-peripheral countries that actually manufacture stuff. And then you have the peripheral countries. So those peripheral countries are the third world. So here's the first world, the second world, and the third world. Those are the areas in which maybe they produce some cotton, sugar, simple things, oil, but they're not manufacturing it, and then they're definitely not the core of the first world. So that's where that comes from. So I'll talk more about that. That's a term, it's seen as no longer politically correct to say it also, for some reason. I don't understand.
With like poorer countries, so if it's irrelevant.
No, it's relevant.
Maybe for one word.
No. They're going to be stage 2. A lot of third world countries are stage 2.
Okay.
Cool. Keep them coming, if you got them.
Are we going to need to better understand the crude birth rate and crude death rate?
Yeah, that's explained in chapter 5.
Yeah, like
Okay.
I read it
Okay.
already. I'm just not entirely sure how that's different than, like how that's calculated. Like it said out of 1,000 people.
Yep. So just out of 1,000 people randomly picked, how many were born in that year?
Okay.
So it just randomly takes 1,000 people and sees how much. And so a high number is going to be anything above 30.
Okay.
A low number will be 8, 9, 10. And that's basically for birth rate and death rate. Those are both the same. So, so you'll see, for example, well, let's go ahead and fire one up.
Is that where the
I
like
probably don't have time.
the 2 or 2.1 come in?
I lost it. What was that?
Like when they talk about what is it, the population
Replacement rate.
replacement?
Yeah.
Is that where that comes in, or is that a little bit different?
A little bit. Replacement kind of. It also goes in hand with fertility rate. Fertility rates, on average, how many children will a woman have in her lifetime?
Yeah.
And so to replace mom and dad, you would need 2.
Yeah.
Because not every baby survives. That's that point 1. It's to kind of compensate for infant death or death before 5. And so that's why 2.1 is the replacement rate. And so it's just kind of replacing mom and dad. The crude birth rate and crude death rate is just purely just a number out of 1,000, out of just randomly picking out of a census of people. How many were born that year prior? Or died that year prior?
Does it have, would the fertility rate influence that?
Definitely.
If you have a higher one, you'll have a higher crude rate?
They often are parallels. There's a lot of correlation between fertility rate and birth rate, for sure. Definitely. All right. Well, you think I'll do attendance here. Once again, the bonus points are added to your Exam 1 score. So on Monday, you take the exam. Next Wednesday, a week from today, we meet for a Wednesday discussion. Once again, of course, optional. And on that day, so literally 2 days after the exam, I'll hand back to you your graded exam. So we'll use that Wednesday discussion for it. And then on that graded exam, you'll see the plus points. So some of you have +6. Is that right? And I know you'll make sure I'm right. +6, some +4, some +2. And I have all that here.
How are people +6? You know, this is what I'm saying.
Because I counted the first day.
Yeah, the first
Oh,
day,
okay.
then that would be 6, yes.
Oh, okay.
I counted the first day.
I got you now.
So, all right, so, all right. So I think I know everybody, almost. Maggie, Margaret, or Maggie, sorry.
It's okay.
We got Kyle in the back from Greensburg. Allison, Timothy's not here. Sandy, Ebony, Robert.
Rob, yeah.
Rob, sorry, Rob.
No, you're fine.
Well, by process of elimination, Sabrina. And then Jason.
Really? Oh,
Cool.
You call me Robert.
That's everyone, right? So any more questions?
I don't know if it's just because I haven't started chapter 5 yet, but I feel a little like describing the population trends for the 20th century is really broad.
So this one, this is exclusively covered in a video, this particular question. And it's in the very first video in chapter 5. So you will not see me writing anywhere about the population trends in the 20th century, but in video 5.1, so the very first video there in the introduction, you'll see that chapter 5.0 probably. So look there, then there's that video on the very first page. But this is the quick 411. The 20th century, why is that important? It's the most dynamic. There will never, ever be a population century like the 20th century. Never, ever, ever, ever will it be like that. So how cool is it that you were born, assuming none of you are 15 or 115, you were born during the greatest demographic century there will ever be. Never, ever, ever will world population grow like it did in the 20th century. And just to kind of showcase this, is something called the J curve, as far as world population growth. We were 1.6 billion people in 1900. Just 100 years later, just 100 years, we went to 6.1 billion. And that's, I don't really make you memorize numbers, of course, on an essay exam, never. But just, 1.6, flip those numbers around, 6.1, huge increase. So a massive increase in population. So what's going on there? Overwhelmingly, increases or advancements in mortality. No, opposite of that. Declines in mortality. The people living longer. Massive declines in mortality. And that makes sense. It goes back to the demographic transition stage model and all of that as far as stage 2 countries. So massive declines in mortality, along with huge population growth. And it's already starting to level out. So once again, never, ever, ever will it be like that again. Why do we know it's starting to level out? Because fertility rates, the amount of kids a woman will have in a lifetime, has considerably gone down. So women, if I asked this question 50 years ago to this audience, 4, 5, 6 kids. I used to ask this in a big, huge lecture hall. Kind of got a little too personal. And most people, I think overwhelmingly, most girls, 1, 0. I got a lot of 0. No kids. And so the decline in fertility is key to understanding why population is starting to slow down. Women just having fewer kids. Also, what's going on, kind of related to that, I've already mentioned that, is improvements in gender equality. So this campus is evidence of that big time. It's stage 4 developed country. I could be wrong, but at least maybe all the dudes are hiding somewhere. It looks like it's about 10 to 1 girl to guy ratio on our campus. So gender equality in the United States, it's definitely here. Go to other parts of the world? No. Universities would be overwhelmingly males. And so here, gender equality definitely apparent. Women start careers before having children. Other things, increased urbanization. So we got a lot of people moving to cities. So it's kind of getting redundant, kind of building off stuff we've already talked about. But that's the quick 411 as far as the 20th century. Key trends. Huge population growth, massive declines in mortality, declines in fertility, which is why it's starting to slow down, improvements in gender equality, which explains why it's slowing down, but also increasing urbanization. So you lived during the most dynamic century there'll ever be in the history of human beings. And you're also alive during the first time in human history more people lived in urban areas than rural areas. In 2007 is where we've hit that 50% marker, where now more people live in cities than in rural areas. So good on your parents for their timing. And their parents' timing. Any more? Any more I can cover?
We can email you.
Oh, of course. And so, this is something you guys will get better at for exam 2 and exam 3. But preparing for it, you'll come into the exam review already with this notes, already with your responses already filled out. It's just inevitable. But if you want to email me your responses and say, what would you think of this? What are something I could say? What would be better? Or maybe it's, I'll say, yeah, this is awesome. This, regurgitate this on exam day, it'll be good. So yeah, I'm here to help. So you can send them via email. We can organize meetings. I will be around on Monday because I give the exam at 1. So I'll be around before in my office till 3, of course. So I'm here to help. So kind of the flipping the classroom puts more of it on you guys. If you got questions, hey, use me. Come see me. Take advantage of the fact that I open up my time for you. That's the whole idea why I'm doing it. So. Cool.
Would you prefer us email you directly or through Encore?
Either one's fine. Because my email's on my phone, I instantly get it. I never respond when I'm at the bar. But on course is something I check maybe twice a day.
Okay.
So, but both of them I check.